Welcome back to Good Morning Tobago on Tobago Updates. Viewers, we are continuing our conversation this morning as we celebrate the life and the service that Mr. Hochoy Charles gave to Tobago as our first Chief Secretary, and not just as the first Chief Secretary. Before and after that, he lived a very full life of service to us here in Tobago, and we certainly appreciate it. And even though we said goodbye to him yesterday, we are continuing to speak about him because we need to remember him, and we need to make sure that his legacy lives on through future generations. So joining me for this part of the conversation, I am being joined by attorney at law, Ms. Ingrid Melville, who would have been one of those people who worked at the later stages of his life with him. So good morning and welcome to you, Ms. Melville. How are you doing?
I'm fine, thank you. Good morning, Kandace. Good morning to your viewers and listeners. And it's a pleasure being here.
So you started working with Mr. Charles from about 2013, 2014, thereabouts, when there was that coalition between Mr. Charles, Mr. Orville London, initially Mr. Ashford Jack, but I mean, that didn't last very long. But, you know, they continued towards making sure we can prepare some strong bills to send down to Trinidad to advocate for Tobago's autonomy. So tell me about that time when you were first introduced to him in that scenario.
Okay, well, Kandace, I was introduced to Mr. Hochoy Charles around 1997. Mm-hmm. That was when they were doing the development plan and they were going around Tobago. I was a very young attorney at the time because I was called to the bar in 1995. And I remember Ashford Jack introducing me to Mr. Charles at the Delaford Community Center. And I was dismissed. I have reminded him about this over the years. Mm. But in 2014, I attended a meeting. In fact, I think it was called a convention, where the findings of the Forum of Political Parties was presented to the population of Tobago. And I made a contribution. I didn't know that it was not the time for contributions because everything was worked out and they had a final resolution to be voted upon. But I was present there, and as the findings were presented, I jumped up and kind of derailed the program because I made certain suggestions. And while some other people might have been thrown off, Mr. Charles was really, really grateful for the contributions I made. And I understand following this, he suggested to the Forum of Political Parties that I should be one of the legal advisors to guide them in the process. So I had the privilege to know the best of Hochoy Charles. Mm-hmm. You know, like in the Bible, the best wine was saved for last. So I knew Hochoy Charles, who was pensive, strategic in outlook, and who always tried to make sure that whatever was done would advance the cause of Tobago's autonomy. Mm-hmm.
You know, one of those things that impressed me the most about Mr. Charles was how much he knew the laws, especially the Constitution. He knew he could quote everything in that THA Act. You know, he made sure, and then he would buff you if you didn't know it. So, you know, and that really impressed me because he was not a man that studied law, but he studied the most important law to us. I mean, was that something that impressed you as well?
Totally. In fact, I had to come up to speed in terms of knowing all the sections of the THA Act because Mr. Charles knew them like the back of his hand. Mm-hmm. If he told you section 31, sometimes you'd wonder, what is section 31? So Mr. Charles knew the law because he was a part of the law. The law is a living thing. Mm-hmm. And Mr. Charles would have been involved in its formulation. He indicated that all the consultations that he had been privy to over the years, in fact, he always told me when I said, Mr. Charles, we have done enough work on this, he would remind me that he had been doing this work since 1976. Mm. So I just heard Dr. Burris speak about ring bang. And yesterday at the funeral, his brother spoke about Hochoy Charles being the watershed, as he was the fifth of 9 children. And in my mind, ring bang was a watershed for Mr. Charles. Mm. Because if he started working on the question of internal self-government in 1976, he would have worked on it 24 years before the new millennium. And the millennium was 1st of January 2020. So when he passed on the 31st of December 2023, he would have done 24 years of work on that on the other side of the millennium. Mm. So Mr. Charles was a formidable man. He was an icon, and he is a stalwart that we in Tobago should do best not to forget.
And then when you guys were in behind closed doors, as you're going through the legislation and the bills and making sure that it was the best to reflect exactly what Tobago wanted, what were those times like?
Very, very explosive at times, because Mr. Charles, as we all know, was a strong character. And what he wanted, he wanted. So sometimes to attain consensus was quite challenging. As you know, the members of the Forum of Political Parties were from different political parties,
Yes.
different ethos. And so at times, I know Mr. Charles, for instance, had the idea that you should have an elected chief secretary. And that almost blew the Forum of Political Parties apart. In fact, at some stages, Mr. Charles stopped coming to meetings because he felt that his input was not being taken seriously. But we were privileged that we also had people like Dr. Levis Guy as part of the support structure. And so she has a personality where she was able to massage and persuade Mr. Charles to return to meetings. But eventually, we agreed upon a document. We did a single bill in 2016, and it included all aspects of autonomy, but it was named the Constitutional Amendment Bill. Now, in 1996, there were two bills which were passed to establish this present Tobago House of Assembly. One was the Constitutional Bill, Act number 39, and then Act number 40, which we know is more of operationalizing the Tobago House of Assembly. So while we sent a single document down, the legislative drafting team, they have also developed two bills. In 2016, we sent down a single bill. 2018, it was revised slightly and sent down again. But right now, there are two bills before the Parliament. And I don't know if you want me to go into some of the challenges that Mr. Charles identified
definitely.
in the present two bills. The issue of autonomy and the amendment to the law is to allow Tobago to be a contributor at an optimal level to Tobago's development. In order to do that, if you even have children, they start off as babies, they are totally dependent on you. Eventually, they become independent, and some of them, they might marry and become interdependent with another person. Trinidad and Tobago should be in an interdependent relationship. But for that to exist, Tobago has to be at a level where it is side by side in terms of lawmaking, for instance. So in the present legislation, Tobago can make assembly laws. But these laws are not at the level that the Parliament makes laws at, because the lawmaking power is in the Tobago House of Assembly Act. The bill which we sent down to Trinidad allowed or proposed that Tobago should make laws at the same level, have a lawmaking institution that would exist side by side with the Parliament. At present, that has been removed from the constitutional aspect of the bill, and it is now in what is called the Tobago Island Government Bill. So that the lawmaking power which the CHA will have will be akin to how local government makes laws, because the lawmaking power is not in the Constitution, it is in a lower level legislation. Similarly with executive power, and even in terms of financing, the financing of Tobago right now, it is stated in the Constitution. The two bills which are before the Parliament, the Tobago Fund is a creature which is crafted in the Tobago Island Government Bill, not at the level of the Constitution. One of the challenges which various administrations have had in Tobago is with regard to the executive power of the Executive Council. There is the Cabinet in Trinidad, and the Tobago House of Assembly Act provides that notwithstanding that there is Cabinet, the Executive Council has powers to, administrative powers to govern Tobago. In the present legislation, the power which the Executive Council would have would be similar to what it has at the moment. And we know that there was a court case which was taken to court under the Orville London administration with the Green Fund.
Yes.
Where the judge said, and that case has not been appealed, so that is the interpretation of the law, that is the interpretation of the power of the Executive Council of the Tobago House of Assembly. In that case, the judge found that the Tobago House of Assembly, the Executive Council, in fact, should be an implementer of policy, an implementer of cabinet policy. And I mean, this would have created great disappointment to the Executive Council, which at that time was under Mr. London. But that is the interpretation of the power of the Executive Council even now. So one of the principles which we try to get into the reformed legislation is that the Executive Council should function at a level similar to cabinet.
And it was certainly something that I know that Mr. Charles is passionate about. I think every time he got the chance to speak on autonomy, that was one of the things that he vehemently went after, and he explained he explained as much as he can because it is so important to him. You know, and then you guys would have also met at that time with the powers that be in Trinidad and so on. What was he like in explaining that to them?
Before the explanation, I want to go to one of the interactions we had. In 2015, we had a meeting with the then, there was a team that was set up by then Prime Minister Kamla Persad Bissessar. And on one occasion, we had a meeting at the Hyatt. I mean, Mr. Charles, he was not pleased about the meeting for Tobago's autonomy occurring off Tobago. But,
I think I remember that.
Yes, but we went for the meeting. Now, Mr. Charles, Dr. Guy, Miss King, Mr. Richards, we stayed at the Radissons, and the meeting was across at the Hyatt. That morning, you know, Mr. Charles was fastidious about punctuality. So he was ready early in the morning. And we were waiting because transport was supposed to pick us up. And Mr. Charles decided, no, we are not going to wait for the transport. We are going to walk. Kandace, have you ever tried to cross Ryson Road at 8 a.m. in the morning when everybody is hustling in Trinidad? And you know there's some concrete median. There's a concrete median in the middle of Ryson Road. So we set off, Mr. Charles in front and all of us in tow, in all his power. And we crossed the first stage. And he looked surprised when he met the concrete median. I looked at Mr. Charles, and to be honest, I think Mr. Charles actually considered pushing a piece of the concrete median away. But somebody pointed out that there was a passage further up the road. So we walked. I mean, cars were blowing their horns at us, and people recognized him. So they started calling, Hochoy! Hochoy na la kabong sidong a Trinidad. We need him to Tobago. And I mean, so I was a bit perturbed by the time we reached the Hyatt after all that experience, but Mr. Charles sat down and he took control of the meeting immediately. So I think that was Mr. Charles' attitude regarding Tobago's autonomy. Nothing was going to stop him from advocating, from seeking to obtain full autonomy for Tobago. And I think his legacy. A legacy is something that starts. It's not a finite issue. And so we in Tobago, we who are left behind, we stand on his shoulders to continue the work to ensure that full internal self-government for Tobago is realized, that autonomy for Tobago is actualized so that we can truly be side by side as a twin island republic.
And I know after that time working on the autonomy bills, there was another time, and that was actually very recent. And Mr. Augustine wanted to make it happen this time around, and he included yourself, of course, and Mr. Charles on that team. And tell me about those last final days working on making sure that Tobago can get its autonomy.
Those final days, Mr. Charles was as fastidious. In fact, Mr. Charles was so committed to working with the process, that even though he knew since 2021, when he went through the bills which are presently before the Parliament, that there were flaws, he sat down and we started off this leg of the journey by Mr. Charles going through each clause of the two bills. Each clause relating it back to what we would have discussed in the forum of political parties, relating it back to what was presented in 2013, because in 2013 there was a bill that was also taken to Parliament by the previous government, the PPP government, and looking at what Tobago needs for its development, to take off in terms of development. So it was a very slow process, but he was so committed to looking at whether what is before Parliament could really work for Tobago to develop at the level that it needs to develop. So we went through that process. We did it in the form of a matrix so that the various perspectives could be seen side by side at a glance, and the identified shortcomings could be highlighted. And that document is with the Chief Secretary. I really feel privileged to have had the opportunity to work with a mind like Hochoy Charles. And like I said, I came in the latter part. So the other man, which a lot of people speak about, I don't know him that well, although I did have a glimpse when he dismissed me for his own personal reasons in 1997. But maybe that was a good thing, because it allowed me the opportunity to grow in terms of looking at issues of democracy and governance, because quite a bit of it I learned when I was not on the island of Tobago.
And you know, as we look back at celebrating his life yesterday and so on, at that wonderful service that we had for him, there was so much said. What did you walk away from that with?
I walked away feeling that there was an opportunity, that through Mr. Charles' death, a new opportunity has been opened up, because a lot of major players were at that funeral service. From Her Excellency, the President, the Prime Minister, members of the opposition were there. So this is the opportune time that we in Tobago, we need to work with the Parliament of Trinidad, because they are the ones who have to pass the legislation. Like Dr. Rowley said, we have to use our powers of influence, our powers of persuasion, and we have to get the country to understand that autonomy for Tobago is not something that Mr. Charles wanted or something that Ingrid Melville would like to have, but it is an impetus for the development of this country. I mean, when we look at how countries are developing right now, when we look at all the challenges of small island development states, we are not able to manage issues that will allow Tobago to grow and develop unless we have that autonomy.
And Senator Dr. Dylan Remy yesterday stated that, it would be the best tribute to him for us to finally have that autonomy. Do you think so?
I do agree. Like I said, it's a legacy that he has left. Imagine 48 years of your life on a single issue. I mean, the world celebrates Nelson Mandela, 27 years in prison. We're speaking about 48 years of a man's life. So we owe it to him, it's a legacy to him, but we owe it to our generations to come. Because autonomy for Tobago right now will probably not have a major impact on my life. But my children and my grandchildren and all the generations to come, they would be able to benefit from that.
And then as we look at how we should celebrate him as well, even just amongst us, while we wait urgency on the powers in trying to be able to make this happen for us, what can we do to celebrate him?
I think the scholarship program is a wonderful idea. Yesterday, the Chief Secretary also spoke about a library, but I really think it is more than a library, because we need the children, those who are not even at school as yet, to learn about this man, Hochoy Charles. So we need a documentation of the journey of autonomy, but we also need stories to be written and told about him. And that could be from various perspectives. I think in Tobago we need more than a library for Hochoy Charles. We probably need a museum on governance. But that's another story, because Tobago is such a critical part of global governance that we do not even recognize it. As we know, Mr. A.N.R. Robinson was critical to obtaining the International Criminal Court. But even before that, when we changed hands 33 times, it was because of certain global development dynamics. And I think we need to showcase that aspect of ourselves within Tobago as well as to our tourists. I foresee that out of the legacy of Mr. Charles, we can be able to attract even students doing their thesis, their students doing research from various universities can come and help us to document and write, as well as our own students during vacation periods. So I believe that these are ways that we can honor Mr. Charles. I often asked him, Mr. Charles, when are you going to document this journey, all this material? Mr. Charles has parliamentary, I can't go into, Mr. Charles has more than the Hansard. So we really have a lot of work to do, because he was a phenomenal man, and his legacy must also be multifaceted.
Well, I want to thank you so much, Miss Ingrid Melville, for being here with us and for sharing those memories with us. And certainly a lot for us to learn from Mr. Charles. I mean, we're definitely not going to have a man like him anymore, but, you know, we can learn a whole lot, and there's so much to exemplify from the way that he lived his life and the way that he approached governance, the way that he even approached just being a student of the law,
yes,
not being a lawyer. That continues to be very remarkable.
Yes, it is. Thank you, Kandace.
Thank you so much. And viewers, certainly thank you to you for being our audience here this morning as we come to you from the Assembly Legislature. And of course, I want to thank the administration of the Assembly Legislature for allowing us to be here all week as we speak about our first Chief Secretary. And of course, what better place to speak about him than here, where he stood so many times advocating and sharing his desire and his vision for what he wants to see Tobago to be, even if the rest of Tobago didn't understand. You know, he was relentless, and for that we are eternally grateful for him. And we're going to see what comes out, how us here in Tobago can be inspired to continue that work that he started, and to take on that mantle and to continue to push the development of Tobago forward. So thank you again for being here with us. I am Kandace Jackson, and from the team here at Tobago Updates, we hope that you have a safe and wonderful weekend, and we'll see you again on Monday.